We are so excited tonight that I almost can't even say his name. It's very exciting. In fact, I brought someone to say his name for me because I was watching a video by our guest, and in the video, which was taped in Texas, he happened to mention the name of one of our local, well-known, excellent comics. And I thought, oh my gosh, he mentioned this person's name from Sacramento, and I thought, who better to do the introduction than Keith Lowell Jensen.
Thought it'd be funny to just walk out after that and go, well, that's hilarious. Did that on purpose. That was a Chevy Chase move. Thought it'd be good to just walk out and go, ladies and gentlemen, Matt Dillahunty, drop the mic and leave. Or knock down a big old thing and... There we go. More party tricks coming up. I'm a little pissed that Matt Dillahunty is in my hometown. I'm excited to have him here, and then I find out Judy's putting him up in frickin' Roseville. I really wanted him to see what Sacramento was like, and he's in Roseville. And it's funny to me because he's from Austin, Texas, and he's in Roseville, and Roseville is way more Texas than Austin, Texas. Or as Matt knows, the South is not actually in the South. It's 15 minutes outside of any major metropolitan area, aka Roseville. How many of you here by sound of applause are here from Roseville? All right, good. I'm done shitting. Done shitting on your town. I had a fun thing happen recently. My daughter, it's funny, I talk about my daughter enough on stage that people have become fans of her. I was recently performing in San Francisco, and I mentioned that I have a daughter, and this like drunk 40-year-old dude stood up in the second row and went, "Max the Tiger!" And I was like, oh, that's creepy. I've done a bad thing. But her and my wife were at home, and some Jehovah's Witnesses showed up at the door. And yeah, my wife's a different kind of atheist than I am, because my wife was never religious. And so she's mellower about it. You know, I find those of us that have a strong amount of religion in our lives and then turned away from it have a little bit more of a chip on our shoulder. But my wife's just cool, you know. So she answers the door. There's a couple of JWs, and she says, "Oh, hi, how are you?" And they say, "Oh, great, we're here to talk to you about, you know, Jehovah." And they look at her, and she's so wholesome looking, you know. She's got a little kid playing on the ground behind her and everything. They're probably thinking, "Oh, she already knows," you know. And my wife says with this big sweet smile on her face, "Oh, we're an atheist family." Which they don't even know that you're allowed to put those two words together, you know? They're like, "You're a what? You say that in front of your child?" But then my wife says to him, "You know, it's 104 out, and you're like way overdressed. Do you want to come in and have a glass of water?" And I don't know how the Jehovah's Witness point system works, but I'm pretty sure that getting into the atheist house is worth some points. I'm pretty sure they were like, "Yeah, we're going in." But they get in, and the minute they get in, my daughter, 4 years old, seizes on them to make sure that they know the good news about dragons. She tells them the difference between a monstrous nightmare and a monstrous strangulator, and the good news that you can actually tame a monstrous nightmare. A lot of you may not know that, but monstrous nightmares make fantastic hunting dragons. Highly recommended. This goes on for like 20 minutes straight. They're hearing about nano dragons and Sea Dragonus Giganticus Maximus, and they're trying to interrupt her to get away. And I learned a valuable lesson from all this, which is, if you know enough about dragons, you can wear them down. So get reading the good book, chapters 1 through 11. I, of course, am referring to How to Tame Your Dragon. Get on that. I don't want to take too much of your time here. I love performing at these atheist events. It's always a blast, and I do slip atheist stuff into my club material, but it's different when I come here and it's just you guys. And I did have one really fun experience that I wanted to recount. You guys remember Rapture Day? Yeah, Harold Camping said the world was ending, and we were like, hey, there's a reason to have a party. So I got invited to perform at the Rapture Day party in Oakland, California, and I gleefully went off, because I almost never get to perform at atheist events in the blue states. So it's always exciting. We're just not as enthusiastic as the red state atheists, you know, because they have opposition. So they're like, we're atheists, you know, and here we're like, yeah, we're atheists, and we're right next door to the Romanian Apostolic Church over there. Cheap rent makes interesting bedfellows, doesn't it? But I got invited out to Oakland for the Rapture Day party, and all of you guys remember what happened in the San Francisco Bay Area on Rapture Day, that a small earthquake hit? Which was awesome. Because I have to tell you, the coolest place I've ever been in my life is at an atheist party on Rapture Day when an earthquake hits. I saw a whole bunch of this. Well, no way! No, bullshit! The shaking stopped. I wasn't scared. You were scared. I wasn't scared. Did you smell weird? So, I have seen Matt Dillahunty speak so many times. I absolutely adore him. And what I do is very different than what he does, and I really appreciate what he does. And like anyone in any kind of performing capacity, I think you always want to think that you can do what the other person does. You know, all comedians want to be rock stars and vice versa. And I was watching Matt in a debate and thinking, maybe I could do that. Maybe I could handle a debate someday. And the guy on stage said something along the lines of, well, as an atheist, you know, you weren't made by a creator or whatever. You have no reason to think that you are any more valuable than a piece of broccoli. And Matt ripped this to shreds. And then he came off stage and I said, hey Matt, what I would have said to the guy is, as a human, I do believe that humans are more valuable than a piece of broccoli, but I do respect the broccoli's right to disagree. And Matt gave me that look that I give you guys when you tell me you have a joke for me. Thanks! So, I'll stick to what I do. But as Judy mentioned, Matt has mentioned me in a talk that he gives, and he actually is talking on the subject tonight, and he asked me to go ahead and do this little thing that I sometimes do at my shows, which is, I talk to a lot of atheists online, I get into a lot of debates online with religious people, and I get a lot of this. Talking to them isn't worth our time. It's like beating your head against the wall. You can't change their minds. I hear this on a daily basis. So I'd like to ask you guys, by a show of hands, who here has been religious at some point in your life? All right, look around you. Think all these people were worth talking to. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my good friend, Mr. Matt Dillahunty.
Thank you. I need to pause for a second, because I have to fill out my membership form to AOL. You thought I was good. If nothing else, you can consider it a partial refund in case this sucks. Talk amongst yourselves. It's all right. My address is in the form. Sorry. How's everybody doing?
Very good.
What other cliches can I toss out while I write this?
How's the weather?
How's the weather? Yeah? So good. Can I tell you that I got rescued by park rangers a couple weeks ago? What happened? Like what?
From what?
You're gonna leave us with that?
From a bear. No, I'm kidding. From my own stupidity. So, life lesson here, if you live in Texas and you start doing a video project, and you decide that it's a really good idea to get like a Texas Parks Pass and go out to the parks, and who do I give this to? If you give this to, so if you get a Texas Parks Pass, thank you for muting me, and then go out and film stuff to get really good shots. And you're, I don't know, let's say midlife-ish and overweight and out of shape and not dressed for a hike and diabetic and haven't eaten and only have 2 little bottles of water, don't do the 1.5 mile hike into the falls thinking that you're going to be able to get back out. On the way, it was a perfect hike in. I got the video shot. If anybody's seen the new videos from the Patreon project that I've been doing, it's up there. I was at Colorado Bend State Park's gorgeous stuff. I got good footage. And then I was heading out, and I got to the point where I was literally having to go like 20 or 30 feet, pause and rest, because it's 103 degrees. And I wasn't wearing a suit jacket, or I probably wouldn't be speaking to you today. But the good news is, I was rescued by park rangers. No cell service out there, at least not much. And so I kept walking with my phone out, looking to see if I could get cell service. And there's also no shade, or at least not much. Eventually, I sat down and pointed the camera back at myself and said, if anybody finds this video, please post it online, because I worked hard on it. Beth, I love you. I don't know why that was second to the video. And at no point did I consider praying. I did reach the park rangers. They brought me some water. I got a little rest, and everything was great. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about debating theists, and this is kind of one of a couple directions where I'm heading even more than I have been in the past. I'm happy to say that while I lost my job last January and there was a lot of misery over the last few months trying to find new work, I am now self-employed as a professional godless heathen for the first time in my life. Thank you. It's very much in part to people in groups like yours. The majority of what I'm doing comes from the people who are donating to the video project. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later on. It's not a call for you to donate, because all you can, by the way, if you want to. But all of the videos are released free to the world. And that's the thing. This is a little different from a Kickstarter project where you say, I want to do this, give me a whole bunch of money and I'll do it. The Patreon thing works a little differently. I'm going to do this whether you pay me or not. And if you'd like me to do it, you support it, and there's more of it, then by all means contribute. But I've done a lot of debates, and I've done the TV show for 9 years or so. And that counts as a ton of debates too, because it's a call-in show. The purpose of the project, though, is not to teach people how to do big formal debates, although it can. The purpose of the project is to give people the tools they need to engage with their friends, their loved ones, the people that you're probably going to be having conversations with about this stuff from time to time. Why do I do what I do? In part, it's because of what Keith pointed out, that I think we were worth talking to, and I think there's plenty of other people who were also worth talking to. I can't stand little pithy sayings. Does everybody know what a deepity is? Yeah, it's a phrase coined by Dan Dennett, and it basically means that there's a statement that sounds profound, but to the extent that it's actually profound, it's false, and to the extent that it's true, it's trivial. And I was listening the other day, and somebody said, stand for something or you'll fall for anything. And I was like, yeah. And then I was like, no, that's absolutely crap. What if the thing you're taking a stand for is the thing you fell for? It implies that what you're taking a stand for doesn't actually matter. It's saying that the truth doesn't matter. It implies that there's something laudable about merely taking a stand, irrespective of whether you're taking a stand on a good issue. So it's a crap saying. And then at the same convention, one of the atheist speakers said the same from their talk, and I was like, oh, should I tell her how much? No, let's just let it stand with their interpretation. But Christians have taken a stand, and Muslims have taken a stand. People of varying religious beliefs have taken a stand on the age of the earth, the position of women, gays, many other groups in society, the purview of science, philosophy, medicine, abortion, capital punishment, war, poverty, taxes, and countless other topics. And they base their stand on their holy books, or the guidance of a priest, or a rabbi, or an imam, or their personal interpretation. I lost my book. Did it sit down here? It is. This is awesome. I, too, have taken a stand. I'm standing up to say that I don't accept their books, or what their leaders have to say. I'm taking a stand for truth, critical thinking, skepticism, a science-based worldview that analyzes the world we live in to try to reach accurate depictions of that world rather than convenient and comforting ones. I love debating, both formal debates and informal debates. Did anybody see the debate I did with Saitin Rugenkate? I'm sorry. For all kinds of things. I went to a Church of Christ in Shenandoah. It's Shenandoah Church of Christ in San Antonio, Texas. I talk about this in the Unholy Trinity Tour video, so I'm not going to go into great detail. This, by the way, is the book. So it's a gathering of preachers from the Church of Christ, which is a strange group. And actually, my favorite thing, one of my two favorite things about the weekend was when I was a Southern Baptist, we would think the Church of Christ was a cult. And when we got there, my wife, if you go into some of these churches, they have all the little pamphlets and flyers up in the front. And I was sitting up there getting ready to listen. And she comes running up to me and she's like, honey, look. And there's a pamphlet that says, why the Church of Christ is not a cult. If you have to print a pamphlet, you might be a cult. But this was their annual get-together of a bunch of preachers who would get up and, oh, wow, there's another note. Teach the other preachers about the things that they needed to teach their congregation. And they invited me down and said, hey, we'd like you to come down Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday and listen to us talk for 9 or 10 hours every day. And then in the evening, we'd like you to debate what we talked about during the day. And I was like, you're going to have to pay me a lot. I mean, one debate is kind of a pain in the butt. Want me to do 3 days of debates and listen to all this is just way over the top. Originally, they'd asked for 4 nights of debate, but I got them down to 3. It was weird. And I won't go into all the details, but here's their lecture notes. And getting past the preface, this whole thing was about, can science and religion coexist? They clearly are, but who's not doing a very good job of it. Literally on the first page, the second line has a logical fallacy. And the only reason the first line doesn't is because it's a quote from Scripture, and it's one of the few quotes that doesn't lead directly to a logical fallacy. It's just a bald assertion. For every house that is builded by some man, but he that built all things is God, Hebrews 3:4. And the second line is, this eternal principle has never been proven wrong. This is how they started their convention. You haven't proven me wrong, therefore I'm right. The people, the preachers at the Church of Christ, and by the way, they're preachers. They're not pastors, they're not ministers, they're preachers. And they get mad if you say anything else, and they will correct you 20 or 30 times if you keep messing it up like I did. And I started to wonder if I was messing it up on purpose, just to annoy them, since they were making me sit through 45,000 hours of willful ignorance and science ignorance on parade. Literally, some of the preachers would get up and say, I don't understand the science, but I talked to someone who does, and let me tell you why it's wrong. And I think it's even written in here in one of them, but I'm not going to search through it. They had a problem with this. The biggest problem that they had was that I was willing to say, I don't know. They'd ask questions. I don't know. By the way, all these debates, they're up on YouTube. So if you ever want to be really amused at a debate, there's 3 nights of me versus Israel Rodriguez, and they were just frustrated by the fact that I would willingly say, I don't know. Because if you're a Church of Christ preacher, you have to know. And the main preacher came up to me at one point and said, are you comfortable with the fact that you're probably going to go to your deathbed not knowing? No! That's why we go out and look for the actual answers. I'm not comfortable with it. None of us are comfortable with it, but I'm not comfortable with the idea of just accepting whatever answer somebody gives me. There needs to be some good argument, some good evidence to back this up. Do you have that on behalf of your beliefs? That's what we're here to find out. Turns out the answer, spoiler alert, no! They were baffled that I would dare to say that words don't have intrinsic meanings. They don't, by the way. I get in arguments with other people as well, not just theists, about this. Words have usages. They are imbued with meaning by our usage of them. And they only have any use when you're communicating with somebody else who has the same or similar understanding of that word. It's a pointer to a concept for the programmers out there. And they were frustrated by this because words have to have some intrinsic, unalterable meaning for their book to make sense. Because if you appeal to your personal interpretations, which they're all doing, things get messy. Which is why there are over 1,000 denominations that identify as Christian who disagree on every single point of doctrine, including whether or not Jesus was even a person. Although those are fewer and farther between. But those people at the Church of Christ had to take a stand. I'm going to talk about interacting a little bit with believers to give some tools and strategies, things that I've kind of learned. Most of it's kind of common sense. Anybody who's been listening to the show for ages has probably heard me say most of these over and over again, which is why I went ahead and gave you a partial refund before we started. Because it's important. And even though it's not in my notes, I'm going to do yet another little story, and that is me with my folks. When they found out I was an atheist, we had a bunch of back and forths, and it was difficult. And my parents' version of religion, my dad was distraught that he had failed me as a spiritual leader and that I was going to go to hell. We had conversations, and I thought that I had found a way for us to stop having these arguments. And that was to say, you believe there's a God, you believe this God wants me to know that he exists, you believe this God has a plan, and you know me. If God reveals himself to me, I'm not going to say, hey, I don't believe in God anymore. I might say, I don't worship him because he's a moral thug. But I'm not going to stay a non-believer. And so rather than taking the responsibility on yourselves and feeling like failures at rearing me to believe this, put the responsibility back on God. You guys pray that God will reveal himself to me according to his plan. This worked wonders. Because now they don't have to feel guilty. It's all in God's hands, where it should be in the first place, whether he exists or not. There's been said that religions poison you and then offer you the antidote. And the truth is that religions tell you that you're poisoned when you're not, and then offer you the homeopathic cure, or the equivalent thereof. First things amongst the list of secrets. Debating secrets that aren't secret. The people that you're talking to, they're not stupid, and they're not evil, necessarily. Some of them may be stupid, and some of them may be evil, or at least largely. But by and large, my IQ did not go up when I stopped believing in God. I was a fundamentalist Christian for 25 plus years. I was studying to be a preacher. Colloquially speaking, I'm probably smarter, but generally, I'm not smart. I just had a different way of looking at information because I got other information that allowed me to gain a perspective that changed my mind. They're confused victims, just as I was, and just as many of you were. That doesn't mean that you necessarily need to pity them. But one of the first things you need to ask yourself, if you're going to engage in conversations with believers, is why? Am I doing it to show off? Am I doing it to show how much smarter I am? Am I doing it because I figured out something that they haven't and I want to lord it over them? Or do I actually care that this is a person who might be willing to change their mind, that I think they're wrong about something and I'd like to convince them? The motivations are important. Because if for no other reason, then they will affect your attitude. Now, I'll get to kind of tone and offense and other stuff a little later. But the people that you're talking to may in fact be blocked from accepting reasoned responses and evidence. Religions have incredibly good defense mechanisms. They quite often involve an insular environment where there's continual reinforcement from everybody around them. They do what I'm going to work on a new talk at some point about deflecting doubt. And so if you come in with a doubt about whether or not God exists, what happens when you talk to your preacher, your priest, whatever? They redirect that doubt not to whether or not God exists, but whether or not your understanding of God is correct, whether or not your walk with God is correct, whether or not you are actually doing what you need to do to connect with God. And what that does is that it implicitly ignores your original position, assumes that you're wrong and that God exists, puts the burden back on you, and then this guilt cycle is reinforced. I can't count the number of times as a Southern Baptist I rededicated my life to Christ just like every other kid in that youth group. Over and over and over again. They have experiences that they think reinforce their beliefs. I get asked all the time, well, were you a true Christian? Well, it depends on what your definition of true Christian was. If it's somebody who has a relationship with the risen Christ, no. But I don't think any of you are either, because I don't think there's a risen Christ to have a relationship with. But if you're talking about somebody who was actually convinced that that was the case, yes. If you're talking about somebody who was convinced that I had experienced the presence of the Holy Spirit, yes. And it turns out, this is a flaw in our thinking. Stay away. Stay away. If you're standing in church and you get that euphoric feeling and you get the goosebumps and you feel elated and and everybody around you is having a similar experience, and they all say that it's the Holy Spirit, guess what? That becomes the correct answer, the one and only correct answer, and it's reinforced by everybody around you. For me, part of my finding my way out was realizing that I could have that same experience, or perhaps similar experiences, from completely different sources. From sex, from drugs, but also from art, from music, the devil's music that I wasn't supposed to be listening to, the albums that I burned when I was stuck listening only to Petra and Carmen and, you know, the Commodores, or no, that's not Commodores. What were those guys' names? I don't know, anyway, it doesn't matter. And you can have those experiences from all those other sources, which tells you what? This is something our brain does naturally. That's the most plausible explanation. I can't say that it wasn't the Holy Spirit, but if it was, why was the Holy Spirit doing something in the same manner that my brain normally does stuff for other reasons? You talk to James Randi about, you know, the psychics. We can't prove that the psychics that they're not performing their miracles through supernatural means. But if they are, they're doing it the hard way. Because you don't need to resort to supernatural means to produce the effects that they're getting. They also have fears that are assuaged by their doctrine. Fear of being alone, fear of death, fear of not knowing, fear that words don't have meaning. And these things are exploited by the religions and often reinforced with a guilt cycle. They don't actually know what they believe or why, almost all of the time. What's the biggest indicators of whether or not somebody who is for example, a Christian is going to become an atheist? It's college education, seminary. Because as soon as you actually dig into these topics and think critically about them, all kinds of problems start creeping up. But most people have been either raised in this or they fell into this because they were exploited. They tend to exploit people in any sort of situation where they need something, whether it's, you know, poverty or minorities or drug addiction. They go after that and try to give you the thing that will fix you so that you will then attribute it to the church and keep going. The experiences that we're talking about. But they don't just give you those things, they reinforce them. This was your fault. This was you falling away from God. And so you have to stay with God in order to keep from falling back into those cycles. And it doesn't matter then if you know what you believe. It doesn't matter if you know what's in the Bible, because you already know God fixed you. Say hi. Why aren't they here? Are your friends? They also don't know what their book actually says. On the drive over here from Reno, somebody played a clip of me on the show to me in the car, which was fine, but I mean, he was trying to show that there was this one call that he really loved, where this caller said, well, what about this? And I asked about, you know, Jephthah and slavery and other things, and he didn't know that any of this was in the Bible that he was saying was the Word of God. How the hell can you say that you're sure it's the Word of God if you don't even know what's in it? When they're confronted with a difficult passage, when you're talking about specific doctrinal problems, which, by the way, not always a good idea, but when they're confronted with a difficult passage, they are eager to accept whatever explanation eases their discomfort. It's not about whether it's a good explanation. It's not about whether or not it's true. It's, I'm uncomfortable with the Bible says this, and the first explanation that seems to alleviate their discomfort is what gets accepted. You should have seen these guys when I brought up slavery at the Church of Christ. The tap dancing that they did to try to justify what the Bible says about slavery. It's pretty explicit. It tells you who to enslave, how much to pay, that you can beat them, all kinds of stuff. And they'd say, well, that was indentured servitude. No, it wasn't. In indentured servitude, you don't buy your slaves from the heathen that surrounds you. Indentured servitude is this idea of I'm going to give you some portion of my life in order to pay for something. Well, yet they had to let them go after 6 years. No, they didn't. That applied to enslaving other Jews. Anybody else, they were your property forever. It says so, very clearly. It also tells you how you can trick those Jews into being your slaves forever by giving them a wife and kids that they don't want to leave. You have to let them go after 7 years, but if you've given them a wife and kids and they come and say, hey, I don't want to leave my wife and kids, Then you take it before the elders, drive a spike through their ear to mark them as your property, and they are now your property forever. How's that for evil? We thought it was going to be nicer to the Jews, but really, it says be nice to the Jews, but here's how you can trick fuck them into being your slaves forever. Right there, just right after it. There's kids. I'll avoid some F-bombs here. Headphones, good idea. Somebody knew I was coming. And so what they'd say then is, well, this was God trying to soften our view on slavery, because we were already having slaves, and God couldn't mess with the system that we already had, so he was trying to give us a softer way to do slavery, so we would eventually realize that slavery was wrong and get rid of it on our own. He's God! If he can say don't kill people, why can't he say don't enslave people? Are you an idiot? How does this even make sense to you? Well, actually it was done for their own good, because God knew the heathen that surrounded you were desperately in need of the truth, and so enslaving them was the best way to teach them about the love of God. I kid you not, that was the final go-to for this. I also objected to this passage in Exodus where God hardens Pharaoh's hearts. Hey, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, okay. And God says, hang on. Hardens his heart. And now he says no. Now, God's clearly violating Pharaoh's free will here, even though he doesn't have it. That's another lecture. And then he goes and he does some plagues. And Moses comes up again and says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, okay. And God says, I'm not done showing off just yet. Let me harden your heart again so I can keep showing what a badass I am compared to the gods that you worship, who apparently can do all the same tricks except for the big ones. So it's like two card magicians going head to head, and then the stage illusionists come in. And for those who don't know anything about stage illusions, the guy that's actually there as the magician didn't do a shit. It's all the people around behind and all that other stuff. They have, in many cases, a constant cloud of reinforcement that surrounds them. Family, friends, church, pastors, deacons, and a culture where athletes thank God for winning the game. Which, by the way, is cheating if God is, in fact, actually helping you win the game. I don't know why God's playing favorites. Did the Chiefs win last night? Nobody knows? I don't know either. They did? So I'm from Kansas City, but I gave up on them a long time ago. So They crushed. My team crushed. I'm now a fan again. I might actually watch a single football game this year, unlike last year. That's right. So for many, there's a lot to lose. To even entertain the notion that a God doesn't exist is risky, because you can lose everything. Take a look at the Clergy Project. Thank goodness for that. My good friend who's like a brother to me, Jerry DeWitt, the first person to graduate, but really just stop being anonymous. Pentecostal preacher in Louisiana, lost everything. He's working his way back. But there's a lot of people who are still in the pulpit and in the pews who don't actually believe, even if they're not completely aware of that fact. They're being kept in place by fear. And here I have a note to mention Keith's comment that we were all worth talking to, but I had to do that already, so thanks. So here's the thing, if you're going to actually engage, how do you go about doing it? Because you might come up against any of these roadblocks. And if you start going down a debate about doctrine, as I did with some of those pastors, you may find yourself making no headway at all, because they're going to have some explanation that's good enough for them. And I can't appeal to evidence that shows that God didn't harden Pharaoh's heart, or that he did, because we have no way of demonstrating that. All I can do is say, your book says this, and they say, yes, but you're reading it wrong. The Bible, interpreted correctly, is what I kept hearing all weekend long. The Bible, interpreted correctly. The Bible, read properly. How the hell did you determine how to read it properly? A lot of conversations in the final debate of that particular weekend was about morality. I did talk about morality last night, but it's a broad topic, and this idea that you can't be moral without God. Here's a question. When they bring up morality to you and how you can't have morality unless there's a God, how did you determine that God is the good one and Satan is the evil one? Didn't you use your own evaluation? Didn't you make a determination that this one's character is in accordance with what you already understand to be good? Ah, yes, they say. But that's because God wrote his moral code on my heart. Well, okay. If Satan had written his moral code on your heart, wouldn't Satan pass with flying colors? If I wrote my moral code on your heart, wouldn't I pass with flying colors? If you're going to judge someone by their own standards, you no longer get to call it good. All you're saying is that it is what it is. You're not judging God to be good. God's telling you, I'm good. And you're saying, no. You're good. I got it. It's right here. Keep it in my heart forever. When you're engaging on these topics, there's always this question of whether or not you're being hostile, whether or not you're being offensive, whether or not you're being an ass. What else have we been accused of? Arrogant, condescending, mean. You don't care. You're just showing off. And that's why one of the first things I talked about was what's your motivation for this? My motivation is to change people's minds. And it works. And so all the people who are saying you can't, they're wrong, as most of us in this room are evidence of. But what's the best way? What's the best way to reach someone? Should you be extra kind? Should you be mean? There is no best way. There is no best way. People believe for different reasons, and they're going to find their way out for different reasons. And people are going to listen to whatever they listen to for different reasons at different times. I can say something to someone, and someone else can say the exact same thing in the exact same way. And they'll listen to this person and not me, maybe because there's a personal disconnect. Or maybe because this is the first time they've heard it, and this is the second time they've heard it. When you give them nuggets of information, it builds up to where they're constantly asking questions and doubting, and then eventually somebody comes along and helps them free themselves from that. When we're talking about, are there like really young kids? So when we're talking about when kids stop believing in, some of them do this on their own. They start getting suspicious and they go exploring and they find out that the stuff's in the closet or whatever else, or they sneak down at night and watch and, I knew it! Others just kind of fall away from that belief, just, no, that was... And there are some, don't give it up until they're ridiculed on the bus for still believing in that. So is it okay to ridicule? Well, yes. But try to make sure that you're ridiculing ideas and not the people, because they're a victim of those ideas. Ridiculous ideas are by definition deserving of ridicule. But also, don't start with ridicule. It's never a good idea. I would say that you will never find a clip of the show with me starting with ridicule, even if we end up there. I may be wrong. I might have started with ridicule once, because I'm not quite perfect. But generally speaking, I try to make sure that people get as good as they give on the show. And if you're calling in to obstinately preach and you're not listening and you're not acknowledging points, then congratulations, you have now made yourself fair game for the wrath of Matt. Because I didn't go knock on your door and say, have you stopped believing in Jesus? And I didn't call you on the phone. You called me to have a conversation, and then you did it dishonestly. And now I'm going to demolish and attack the ideas that you cherish, whether it bothers you or not. I'm going to try to not attack you personally, but on occasion I have mentioned that somebody's an idiot or a moron, etc. Even earlier in this talk. Are you an idiot? Why'd you believe that? And then the thing you have to do is point out what I've done, which is I'm not summarizing the entirety of somebody's character in doing that. We are all idiots, and we are all morons about something at some point. The goal is to stop being that way about so many things so much of the time. Well, you caused offense. I don't care. That's not true. I do care, but I don't care. You don't have a right to not be offended. What are you actually being offended? What is it that's actually offending you? Is the key to get to whenever they say that they're offended. What is it that offended you? You said that God was like a mafia boss. He is. I mean, if your description of it is accurate, that's my assessment of his character. But why does that offend you? If your God is bothered by the fact that I compared him to a mafia boss, why doesn't he come tell me himself? I'm right here. Is your God so weak and puny that he needs you to get offended on his behalf and come tell me that you're offended on his behalf? How do you even know that your God's offended? Maybe your God laughed. Ha ha! That dumbass thinks I'm like a mafia boss. I'll smite him. Nice soul you got there. Shame that something happened to it. One of the things is to use whatever tool you think fits the situation the best. You are going to be better at reading your family and friends than I am. I can't tell you what your family's like or how to interact. You're going to have to figure that out pretty much on your own. Try to be aware of the fact that these are people. These are people that you care about. Let them know that they are people that you care about. I would not spend my Sundays doing what I do if I thought the people who were calling in were actually stupid and I didn't actually care about them. I'm trying to change people's minds because I do care and because I think they can get it. I am the eternal optimist. I get accused quite often of being a firebrand atheist, which is true sometimes, but I'm also an incredible diplomat quite often. I fit both roles. I'm a chameleon, I'm a liar, whatever. It's really about reading the situation and figuring out what the best course of action is, and that takes some practice. Get used to having the conversations with each other, online, and with yourself. The video series that I started doing was me filming, I don't know if anybody's seen it, in my car. I have a little clip for my phone in my car. And it started off, I would talk, I had a 40-minute drive back and forth to work. And I would talk to myself about what I wanted to say at the next lecture or event, you know, just kind of reinforcing ideas. And I talk out loud because I think hearing it out loud changes the way my brain processes it. But I set up a camera to record just so I wouldn't lose those notes, and that turned into a series of videos. It's good practice. But don't take it too seriously, because if you think you are the best debate opponent that you're going to come across, you're going to start doing horrible in the discussions, because there are people who are going to think of things you didn't. You're going to have to engage with other people. When we're talking about this causing offense, how hard should you push, how offensive should you be, there's been a constant debate in the community about, you know, diplomats versus firebrands, or how should you ridicule, should you go to name calling? Generally not, I would say. But, you know, I break that rule too. But there's been this kind of tone trolling, I like to call it, where some people want to say, don't be a dick. Now, there are people who are being dickish about all of this. Their goal is not to help people or change minds. Their goal is to show off. But I have yet to hear any of the firebrands tell the diplomats to stop being so nice. And yet the diplomats seem to think it's okay to tell the firebrands to stop being mean, which I think is a dickish thing to do. My opinion is that we need both and more. We need different people using different methods, because all of it becomes nuggets of information that can be processed later. And maybe my ruthless attack on their God makes it easier for you to say, oh yeah, look, I don't agree with him, I'm not necessarily like him, but here's the thing. And then go through what the points are in a way that they're going to be perhaps more receptive to. And it may be the case that the opposite is true, that you might have talked till you're blue in the face with your grandmother about why you don't believe this and how much you love her, and please, Nana, don't do this, and I'm just trying to tell you this is, you know, this is causing harm. And then she tunes in and sees an episode of the show where I'm being an ass, and she finally gets it. Because Greta Christina gave this talk a gazillion times, and every time I hear it, I love it more and more about why are you atheists so angry. She even wrote a book about it. Don't confuse passion for anger. And don't confuse a forthright tone in addressing arguments as just being mean, because the goal is not to offend, even if they do get offended. You just might not care that much about whether you offended. Study and know the arguments. Know the topics, if you can at all. If you don't have the interest in doing that, only engage to the extent that you're comfortable. Don't jump in way over your head. If you find that you have jumped in over your head and you realize it, Don't keep going. Stop and say, you know what? I'm not sure about that. Let me think about it and get back to you. And then think about it and get back to them. Do what you say you're going to do. The Patreon project that I've started is patreon.com/atheistdebates. But mainly I'm doing this video series. And the first video that came out in August was on Pascal's wager. Now, one of the first comments was, holy crap, you spent 27 minutes on Pascal's wager? No. I can demolish Pascal's wager in 2 minutes, and there's a clip of me doing it on the Atheist Experience where I demolish every single aspect of Pascal's wager. But my goal in setting up these video projects wasn't to give somebody a script that they could quote, because that's what the other guys are doing. The people that you're arguing with, they didn't come up with this stuff on their own. They got it from their pastor. They got it from William Lane Craig, or Ravi Zacharias, or Dinesh D'Souza, or Ray Comfort, maybe. I don't know. And they're just parroting what they say. And so one of the key things that you can look for is a way to throw them off their script. Because when they're on their script, they're not thinking. They're preaching. Preaching doesn't require thinking, by the way. You can pass that around. I just invented that right here, right now. Preaching. The only thing, people are like, oh, you went to seminary. No, I didn't. Didn't go to college. The only thing that's required to be a Baptist minister, which I wasn't, but I was going to be, is a pulse and the willing to tell lies. Or say what you think is true, even if you don't have a good reason for it. The Pascal's wager video, the reason it took 27 minutes is because the goal of this is to give people an understanding. And I went in great detail about the different versions of the argument that you're going to hear, including the original version from Blaise Pascal and what was wrong with it, and why his version may in fact be worse than the modern versions, because Pascal agreed with me that belief is not simply a choice, that you don't just choose to believe something. You're either convinced or you're not. And so Pascal says, if you cannot be convinced, go ahead and do all the religious stuff and act as if you're convinced, and hopefully someday this will convince you. He's arguing for intentional self-deception because he thinks the ends justify the means. Getting people to understand this means that whenever they're presented with Pascal's wager, however they hear it, they don't just have to respond with, let's see, what did Matt say? Oh, it's wrong on this level because it assumes, only one version of heaven or hell should go from the best heaven to the worst. You don't want to do that. As soon as you understand it, you can talk more comfortably. You can speak about this, and you know how to respond. In early September, I released the first video on the argument from design, which deals with some aspects of design, which is seeing purpose and order in the world. There's a second half coming that's going to be called What Are the Odds, that focuses on the intelligent design movement and the probability that life can occur and things like that. So recognize the roadblocks that you're probably going to come up with. Semantics. People say, oh, you're just arguing semantics. Yes, because semantics is about meaning. If you just want to say you're arguing about labels, cool, let's set the labels aside. I don't need any particular label, let's talk about the context. But if you're saying, oh, you're just arguing semantics, yes, because semantics is about meaning, and meaning is important. It's the concept behind the label. Watch out for shifting the burden of proof. Well, you don't have an explanation for the origins of the universe either. Well, even if that's true, you just agreed that neither of us have an explanation for the origins of the universe, and so we can at least agree that you're wrong. Oh, well, you can't have a moral system without some supreme ultimate authority to point to. I agree. That's why the supreme ultimate authority that I point to is reality. We're physical beings in a physical universe. Our actions have consequences that are dictated by reality, and it's those consequences that we're evaluating. As soon as we live in a universe where if I stick a knife in you, you get a warm, fuzzy feeling, and your life improves vastly, well, now I'm going to have to reevaluate whether or not sticking a knife in you is moral or not. Oh. But are you sure? No. As a matter of fact, I don't really accept that we can actually be certain about anything, that we're dealing in a world of probabilities where we can approach what I deemed maximal certainty based on the logical absolutes and reasonable certainty on these other things. Watch out for poorly defined terms. Is God very well defined? No. Is God very well defined among two believers sitting in the same pew at the same church? No. They may think it is. Ah, we're together and we're worshiping. Thank you, God. Wait, did you say thank you, God? It should be thank you, Jesus. 1,000 schisms in churches because somebody didn't define their terms well enough before they got a congregation. God isn't the only thing that's not well defined. Spirituality. Sam Harris has a new book coming out. I haven't read it. I'm not going to trash it or anything else. But the term itself is one that is so broadly used to mean almost anything to anybody, that I find it useless. And so even if we found something that some people might label spirituality, I want a different label for it just to avoid the confusion. Evidence, good evidence, reasoned argument, foundations for belief. Why should I believe this? None of those things are very well defined. We're still working out a lot of them. And there are some things that are pretty easy and some aren't quite so easy. Watch out for appeals to just so claims. Weasley terms like it's evident or clear or plainly. This is right there. I did it in the Pascal's wager video where Pascal basically argues, well, it's clear that unthinking things don't think. Yeah, that's clear. And then he says, plainly, they're acting towards a purpose, so that purpose must come from outside of them. And I'm paraphrasing. And so what he's doing here is saying something that you want to recognize as obvious and true, something that he's trying to assert and make you think is obvious and true. And so he's equated the two by using clearly and plainly, except he wrote in a different language, but the translation is that way. It's an equivocation. And I posted a review of my debate with Cy because I fell for it. Cy presented exactly one formally structured argument for the existence of God, which was laughed and mocked from the very beginning. And that was, it is reasonable to believe that which is true. It's true that God exists. Therefore, it's reasonable to believe that God exists. And he said, I doubt Matt's going to object to the first premise because that's the definition of reason, so we need to talk about the second premise, which is, it's true that God exists. And I just went along with it, partly because I had a prepared script. The first premise is false. It's not reasonable to believe that which is true. Or I should say, it is reasonable to believe that which is true is not actually necessarily true. It may be reasonable to believe some things are false. It may not yet be reasonable to believe something that's true. Because the truth, the fact of the matter, is completely separate from the justification for it. It's true, I will tell you, that I have a buck knife on my desk at home. Do you have a reasonable justification for believing that claim? Well, you might if you think I'm honest, and if it's not an outlandish claim. But the truth of the proposition is completely separate from whether or not it's reasonable to believe it. Learn some basic common logical fallacies and don't worry about what they're called. I am terrible at this. This is something my wife hits me over the head with stuff. She's like, stop! Don't say argument from ignorance. They don't know what it means. To them it makes them sound like you're just saying that they're ignorant or they're stupid. They don't understand that. Instead, learn the fallacy and explain it. Say there's a logical fallacy, which is to say that something is true because it hasn't yet been proved false. The argument from ignorance at the beginning of my book here. Not my book. I didn't write this book. My book will be much better than this. But don't rely so much on the fact that the fallacy has a name or that it's got a classical form or anything else. It's good to know those things, but don't use it that way unless you know that the person you're talking to understands it. By the way, a side note about the Church of Christ thing, and this is just a how cool am I story, so bear with me. After all that talk about morality, they were saying this isn't a Bible, but I'll pretend like it is. That the Bible was the ultimate moral guide, and it was morally perfect, etc. And I told them that I could write a better moral guide than the Bible, and I could prove it to all of them. Because I could rewrite the Bible word for word and change its position on slavery to be opposed to it, and now it would be a better book. And the faces in the pews were like, what? And people were not happy. Some people were not happy that I dared to suggest I could write a better book than the Bible, so they just flat out denied that I could. No, the Bible wouldn't be better without that. No, it needs to have that slavery thing in there to be morally perfect. And I'm sure that if I had kept talking to them, they'd have said, the reason it needs to have the slavery thing in there to be morally perfect is because getting slavery wrong allowed us to get slavery right, and we needed that in order to be morally perfect. Because that's the way they think. At some point in the conversation, you're going to get to where they say, you just have to have faith. I can't prove to you that God exists. It's a matter of faith. It's all about faith. Faith, 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 the F word. One of the first videos I'm going to do in October, it's about half written now, and I'm not going to go through any portion of it. It's all about faith and how to respond to it. What does this word even mean? Talk about an undefined term. My definition is that faith is the excuse people give when they believe something and don't have a good reason. As soon as you have a good reason, you don't need faith anymore. I've never heard anybody say, well, I just checked the air in the tires and now I have faith that they're at the right PSI. Oh, okay. You might have faith that they're right PSI if you haven't checked yet. And that's then a belief that you don't have a good reason for. Maybe you should have checked the damn tires. It's very likely that each of you will find yourself in a position where you're asked to defend what you believe or explain why you don't agree with them with someone else. And explain to them why you think that someone else's position, what their position is wrong. You don't owe anyone an explanation for anything. You are not obligated to explain to your loved ones or your friends why you don't believe. You are not obligated to learn 1,000 dead languages, logical fallacies, neuroscience, biology, chemistry, geology in order to debunk their crap. But you can. If that's who you are and that's the effort that you're willing to put into it, by all means. But you don't owe anybody any of that. The only thing that you need to do is be yourself. They'll either like you for who you are or they won't. A lot of problems with people coming out, having conflict with family members. My wife gave a talk about the problems that she's had with hers, and it's improving. Shock! Her grandmother and her aunt wouldn't even refer to me by name. Would not refer to me as her boyfriend, would not refer to me as her husband after we got married. Lied and said they weren't invited to the wedding. Lied and said they called my parents and found out some dirt about me. Which when I called my mom and said, what? She said, they didn't call me. That's very unchristian of them. That's what I thought. But how they referred to me was, that man who gives you sexual pleasure. Because they were obsessed with sex and sin. And they thought that was an insult, but I went on a fucking t-shirt. Go me! She stopped responding to some of the love abuse that they were engaging in, and things are improving, and I'm cautiously optimistic. They've never met me in person. Her mother and father have, but her grandmother and the rest of her family who are being terrible to her, or have been terrible to her, never met me in person, even threatened to have me arrested if I showed up at her great-grandmother's funeral with her. So I stayed home. I'm not, despite my reputation, I'm not always about making waves. Just most of the time. But if you do take a stand, care. Because these are human beings. If you have some other motivation other than helping to improve humanity and the people you care about, I guess there could be a good one that I'm not aware of, but I can't think of one that's much better than that. One of the most respectful things you can do to show somebody you care is to be willing to tell them why you think they're wrong. I get, people are like, oh yeah, I love the show, it's awesome. And I love that. I love the fact that people benefit from the show. It makes the crazy calls worth it. And I'm going to say this, but please don't do this right now or tonight very much. But I like it when people come and say, yeah, when you said this, I think you got a little bit wrong. It should have been like this. Because that's what helps me improve. But I don't like to say that in a talk because then like 20 people come by. You were wrong on this, and I can't process all of that. I need to take notes. So like send an email when I'm wrong. Ask them what they believe and why. Ask them other questions. Ask them the difficult questions. Ask them the what-if questions. Ask them the questions that make them think. The Socratic method of asking people questions so that they lead themselves toward a solution is perhaps one of the most powerful tools we have ever discovered. Nothing has much more impact in changing your mind than you will if you thought yourself to there. Having somebody preach to you, we can have biologists present facts all day long about evolution and it doesn't get through. But if you start asking them questions, wait a minute, so you believe the Earth's like 6,000 years old or so? How does your model account for the diversity? What do you mean? Well, it seems to me that if Noah and his family got on this boat with a bunch of animals, and then they landed, then curiously we have animals distributing themselves around the globe in strange configurations, as if they were originally from there. How did I get there? Oh, but also, if there was only these kinds, then they evolved or changed, and don't say evolved the first time. And those kinds changed into the millions of different species that we have now. Oh yeah. So what you're saying is, you believe in evolution, but you believe in a ridiculously, impossibly fast version of evolution. Well, no. And eventually you'll get to, well, God's magic, he can just do that. And then you won. But you don't have to say you won. Let him sit there and stew and think about it for a while, and then come back with something else. Even if it's appropriate to ridicule an idea, to equate their God to a mafia boss, or to point out that they've sacrificed their humanity on the altar of servility in ways that result in actual harm and pollute their mind, preventing them from taking actions that would make their life better, do it with the positive goal of helping them improve the world and themselves. I want a world where marriage equality is a reality, where anti-choicers have all changed their minds or no longer have any impact on legislation, where there are no second-class citizens, where religion isn't forced into the impressionable minds as if it were true, where people are taught how to think instead of what to think, where skepticism and critical thinking are valued, where science isn't merely valued when it's convenient, where no cat is ever declawed. And good job, California, for leading the charge on that. Where no one is ever bullied or made to feel like an outsider, where people have the opportunity to earn a fair wage, where mental illness is no longer stigmatized so that people can get the help they deserve, where purported psychics no longer act as parasites on the grief-stricken or mislead time-sensitive investigations, where nobody goes hungry or thirsty, where people don't ignore the firefighters, search and rescue swimmers, and paramedics who saved their lives while giving credit to their God for performing a miracle, where real medicine is never secondary to prayer or pseudoscientific alternatives, where no child dies because their parents' religion prevents them from seeking appropriate medical attention, where you're elected based on your position on the issues and not the position you take when you pray, where citizens are still subject to the laws of the state and not the laws of the religious group that they belong to, where honor killings, acid attacks, and the stoning of people accused of witchcraft or adultery or driving a car or being in public without a man present have long faded into the past as the abominations that they are. Everybody in this room, I don't have to tell you, you're all aware, unless there's a closet theist in here, in which case, great, I'll talk to you afterwards. Superstitious ideas, bad thinking, flawed reasoning, whether it comes in the form of pseudoscientific woo or religious doctrine, causes real harm. When people are made to feel that who they are is fundamentally wrong, that does real harm. And it's worse when they also have this idea that God made you that way on purpose to give you an extra hurdle to overcome, which I've heard I don't know how many times. People will say, you just can't argue with these people because they don't accept reason. They don't accept evidence. They're faith-based. They've been indoctrinated. They have succumbed to dogma. They can't think for themselves. That's why they need help. And if you can't get there by addressing doctrines, and if you can't get there by the arguments for the existence of God, and exposing the fallacies and engaging with them on the levels that you're normally involved in, take a step back, remove the religion entirely from the discussion, and have the conversation at a meta level about, okay, how do we go about determining what's real? How do we go about determining what we should believe? What standards of evidence should we have? What sorts of arguments should we accept? Should we just take somebody at their word? You can go around and interview people who will tell you their alien abduction stories right now. Countless of them. And they'll tell very similar stories. Some of them will even have shared experiences. And they'll tell you, do we believe that they were abducted by aliens? Most of us don't. It's usually mocked and scoffed. I don't know for sure that they weren't. I don't believe they were. But that's here and now. You can actually talk to that person. How can it possibly be that a situation that is directly analogous to this becomes more believable after a couple thousand years have passed, and what we have are anonymous written records by anonymous sources of perhaps other written records that were copies of translations of copies of an oral record, and we can't talk to anybody. Never mind the fact that even if we can talk to people, we know that eyewitness testimony is unreliable. I saw her turn me into a newt. Spectral evidence was thrown out of the courts ages ago. Why isn't it thrown out of all of society? If you can't get there on the merits of what they're specifically saying, take a step back and address the foundational questions of how they got there. The question that I ask over and over again on the show is, tell me what you believe and why. And the why is the important part. What you believe is a matter of curiosity, it's a matter of interest. I want to engage with whatever it is that you believe, find out if I agree or not. But the why is the important part. And after they tell you why they believe, if you can get them to do that, ask them, why should I now believe? Because if their reason is that they've had a personal revelation from God, then clearly, until I've had that same revelation, I shouldn't believe. And they should agree that I shouldn't believe. Which is how we get back to me telling my mom and dad, I pray to God to reveal himself to me. Now the burden's off of them. And that same argument can get turned back to get them to realize that they may not have a good reason. We got a lot of work to do. We're making great progress. People are leaving religion in record numbers, including the clergy. The nuns are the fastest growing group. And I do what I do because I want to change the whole world. That's a big friggin' goal. We're never going to hit that goal. I like picking goals that, if you aim for the best and you hit pretty damn good, that's nice. I want to free the world of superstition and religious thought. I can't do it on my own. But I can't help other people get there. For the specifics on arguments and stuff, there's thousands of sources. IronChariots.org is a counter-apologetics website we put together years ago. It goes through a lot of the arguments. But if you don't like it in text form, wait till I produce the videos on them. Go see other people's videos, interact, and do what you can. And I'll finish with this. I'm thrilled to become a new member of this community, because I like the fact that we are building communities around, because people leaving religious beliefs need a place to land. We don't all need the same thing. Some people need Sunday assembly and the church-like atmosphere. And if that's for them, great. Stop knocking them for it. If you don't need it, great, don't do it. I mean, I'll happily go and speak at any Sunday assembly anywhere anybody wants. And I'll applaud them all for doing something good. Giving people a place, because we're not all the same. There are atheists I've spoken to who have been atheists for 50 years, will wake up in the middle of the night from a nightmare about the hell that they were indoctrinated into as a child. I've never had a nightmare like that. When I finally gave up religion, that crap all just evaporated. I realized I'd never spent a second worrying about the hell or heaven of any other religion, so why was I worried about the one I was indoctrinated into? And if there's nothing I can do about it, why worry about it? But other people don't necessarily have that same idea and that same capacity. Help them. Tell them. You may not be ready to go try to deconvert all of your friends and family. Good. Don't get me wrong, I want a world free of religion. But nothing I do is intended to create little disciples that run around knocking on doors. Have you given up your belief in Jesus? Grandma, I know you're on your deathbed, but I just want to let you know, you're not going to heaven. No matter how much of an asshole I may look like on occasion, and actually be, and I fully admit, I am frequently arrogant and condescending and all sorts of things. I'm not even saying it's a good thing to be, but it does all come from a desire to help change the world. And so I think the end result may in fact be good. And people will come and say, oh, I think you'd be much more effective if you did this and this and this. Great. Do you have any data to support that conclusion? Because what I've got is a decade of doing a TV show, several thousand emails from people who have given up their religious beliefs because of what we've done on the show. People coming up at conventions to say that the efforts that we've done on this TV show or in this debate has helped change their life. They used to be a Christian, they used to be a fundamentalist, they were a Baptist, a Catholic, they used to be an agnostic, because I fixed those people too. Other freethinkers, shit, sorry. They used to not be a skeptic, all of these things, and now they're better. And And that makes every crazy call worth it. It makes me my harshest critic to make sure that when I'm done with the show, I'm thinking about what I could do better next time. Everybody isn't suited to having these conversations, but everybody can have them on some level, provided you're willing to do a couple things. Care. Say I don't know when you don't know. Pause when you get stuck and say, let me think about that and get back to you. Do you have some resource I can look at to evaluate this better? Don't overextend yourself to make assertions that you can't back up, like Christianity was invented in the 4th century by the Pope and the Masons, which I've heard twice this week after mentioning how wrong it is ages ago. And being willing to change your mind, because that's what you're trying to do in somebody else. Thanks for having me.
Question and answer period, maybe about 15-20 minutes. After that, I'll come back up here, wrap it up, and then he says he will even stay after that if there are even further questions you want to talk to him one-on-one, and then after that, maybe we'll find a place to go.
How long was that? I don't pay any attention to it.
About an hour.
An hour and 5. Wow! They said, oh, shoot for 45, and I knew I was going long.
So rather than pass this mic around, I'm just going to ask for the record, because we're being taped tonight, if Matt, if you would repeat the question as people call them out to you. Thank you.
And you know, if you have to pee or leave or anything like that, you're not going to offend me, because I don't stop talking. Yeah.
There are some people who are who come into religion when they didn't used to be. Like I have a friend. She was somewhat spiritual, but she considered herself liberal. Now she's not only an evangelical Christian, she's a young creationist, she's a geocentrist. She's come into this whole community of people that makes her feel warm and accepted, and just mentioning anything that's contrary to those beliefs, like me talking to one of her friends about the evolution of human teeth, is immediately pounced on, is labeled as offensive. So how do you approach people who are so stuck on their own, are terrified of losing their community, their acceptance?
Yeah, you went a completely different direction than I thought you were going. So you started with not everybody is born with a religion; they come to it later. So the question is, how do you address those people who are closed to conversation and evidence, where everything that you might say that opposes them causes offense? Don't, but do. And so that the answer to this is, Peter Boghossian talks about people being doxastically closed, that you're not going to reach them with reason and evidence. And there are some people who are like that, but they're not necessarily always going to be like that. That's why when I say if you're not making inroads in one area, take a different tack. Talk about how we justify certain things. Why is she convinced of this? Why is it that she's convinced that the Earth is 6,000 years old? Has she studied the science, or is she disregarding the science in favor of what her preference is? And if you don't want to talk about even those specifics, just talk about how we go about determining if something's believable. Come up with an analogy, something that's comparable. People ask about, what we should be teaching kids. And I keep saying, don't teach them what to think, teach them how to think. We need to be instilling them with the critical thinking skills and skepticism. And people would say, oh, my niece and nephew, my brother's a theist, and my niece and nephew, I really want to kind of undermine the religious teaching that they're doing, which is kind of what you're talking about with somebody who might be closed. And that is, try to instill in them a passion for discovering about reality and asking questions and questioning everything. But at the end of the day, if you've tried everything that you're able to do, and they're still closed to discussing this at all, you probably shouldn't continue pushing it. What you can do is say, I don't agree, I care about you, I love you, I know that you don't want to have this conversation, and maybe it makes you uncomfortable, I don't necessarily understand it. Could you tell me why? And if even that is halted, then just keep being a decent human being. Because one of the best things that we've done, and we're getting better at, is making people aware that the neighbor down the street who they've liked for 20 years is actually a godless heathen. And so is the person who delivered their mail and the person who delivered their child. finding out that we're all out there everywhere makes it very difficult to vilify, and finding out that our Rod joked that the only thing we might have more of is diplomas, but it's not, you don't want to go to necessarily that, but finding out that the experts in the scientific fields that are relevant to this, and the people who are moral authorities and philosophers, that a lot of these people don't believe in a God. And if nothing else, you can talk about the fact that what makes her particular view, whether it's the 6,000-year view and God, and this other, what makes that preferable to a Muslim view or a Hindu view? And if she's completely shut down, there are some people that you're just going to have to say, you're not going to convince. My parents are going to go to their deathbed believing what they believe, and it kills me. But unless somebody else figures out a way to reach it, I'm stuck. And I would rather keep the relationship I have with them, even knowing that their beliefs are harmful to them and others, than to keep pushing and lose that relationship. They're okay with me disagreeing with them now. And in some cases, that's going to have to be good enough. And as sad as it is to say, I said it to Judy earlier today, I don't like saying it, some of the big changes are actually going to have to wait until some people die off. Those bad ideas kind of have to shuffle right off the moral core. What else? Yes, sir?
A couple of points. One, when you're challenging someone in the beliefs, you're challenging their identity, their belonging. I belong to that church. They accept me. That's one of the most important things in my life. You got to realize that you're chipping away at that, not just rational beliefs, but a very deep fundamental need. So second point, in working with a couple of people, if you can point out the internal dissonance that's there, whether they like it or not. That example, you read a paper, 4-year-old girl dies from a disease, or their niece dies from a disease. Okay, where is your all-loving, all-powerful God? Well, there's a dissonance there. It doesn't make sense. And to say God works in mysterious ways is not an answer. What is the answer? The answer is there's no God to shorten the time. So anybody who believes has to carry some internal dissonance. And if you can find that in their case, that's something to start working with.
Yeah, he's talking about the cognitive dissonance that believers tend to have when their views come in conflict with the world. And it's a great point. It is, you know, one of the clear points of attack to address to try to get people to realize it. Here's the problem. The religions that exist now, the religions that were easy to debunk, that were easy to show this dissonance, have faded away. The religions that exist now are the ones that have modified themselves and thrived enough and built defense mechanisms. Basically, some of them have become more and more vague, which is why you get to these liberal and moderate theologians who are like, oh, well, you know, I know it says that homosexuality is an abomination, but we like gay people, and so we're going to choose to use this other verse instead. And so when you try to address something like the problem of evil, you're talking about, you know, where was your God when this kid dies? What you're going to hear back from fundamentalists is, that's not God's fault, that's our fault. God's creation was perfect, we ruined it, we spoiled it, we brought sin into this world, God didn't. And so from that point, then you have to take a step back. This is always a step back after every one of these responses and say, okay, did your God know that this is what was going to happen when he created the universe? Because if you have a God who knowingly created this universe when he could have created another universe, then your God specifically chose the universe in which I am an atheist and that kid died, which puts the burden for the choice on that God. This is the universe your God wanted. If your God wanted a different universe, why the hell did you make it? Oh, he didn't have any choice in what universe to make? Okay. Then you believe in a different God than the one the Scripture points to. Oh, he didn't necessarily know what would happen in the future. Well, then whence cometh prophecy? If God doesn't know what's going to happen in the future, if we have free will and we're able to actually act, then you can't say that the book is prophetic and led for us to discover that Jesus is there. And you certainly can't go to Revelation and talk about how the New World Order is going to ruin everything and take over. There's always one little point back. And people ask a lot, you know, oh my gosh, I wouldn't even have thought of that. How did you 10 years on the show, a handful of years before then? I do this every day, all day, and sometimes by myself, which is really, really sad. But the one thing is that I lived it for 25 years. And I don't know the specific thing that convinced me, but I know the types of things that convinced me. But you're absolutely right. I'm not a huge fan of the problem of evil because it ends up getting pushed back so often that I tend to just kind of circumvent it and ask them questions about, please tell me what your God's about and why he created this particular universe this way. Do you have some understanding of this? Quite often you'll just get, nope, it's a big mystery to me. Oh, Catholics? I mentioned this earlier. Catholics love them some mystery. I went to a Catholic funeral where the word mystery was mentioned, I'd say at least 57 million times in the course of, oh, the mystery of life and the mystery of the universe and the mystery of mysteries that is God's mysterious will. And I was like, where is Scooby-Doo in any of this? Let's figure this out. Who else had a question? Yes, sir?
I think, Matt, one of the biggest problems with atheists is we live in a world that's dominated by Christians, and to be out ourselves, we kind of commit political suicide or professional suicide, or we're worried about basically our, losing customers or losing our job or having something at work, because, oh, you told people you're an atheist and now you're being judged or whatever. Being a trailblazer, I guess, is kind of a scary thing because now you're putting yourself out there and you're taking a chance on not losing your job or not losing customers. What would your, idea of overcoming that, or without just not caring and not kind of throwing yourself on the fire, what? Sure.
So he's basically asking what are my recommendations regarding coming out or not coming out and dealing with the consequences.
Similar, yeah.
Sure. So, like I mentioned, I lost my day job in the software industry last January, and I put in a lot of resumes, did some interviews, and what I heard back on the rare occasions I heard anything was, we think you're a great technical fit, but we're not sure you're a good social fit. Now, I can guarantee you that even though I'm prone to being an asshole, I'm never an asshole during an interview. So the only way that they could determine that I was a good social fit is if they Googled me and didn't like what they found. I have heard from countless people who have lost jobs, who are in custody battles where their lack of religion is being used against them. People who have been ostracized from their families, people whose businesses have collapsed. Collapsed? People who have been ostracized from their families, people whose businesses have collapsed. You can edit that out. That way I never look stupid. It's difficult. We do not yet live in a world where it is safe for everyone to be out. There is huge risk. There's risk of losing your entire social structure. I want everyone who can be out to be out, because that shifts the nature of the world such that those who can't currently be out can be out later. People often, coming out, they often relate this to, coming out as gay or whatever else. And there are some parallels, but I want to make the two equal. Because first of all, you could live your life not believing and generally not have anybody find out. And the only way to do that if you're gay is if you don't date anybody and don't have any friends that know you date anybody. I can't, when I walk into a room, nobody knows my sexual orientation. They know, I guess, my gender expression, but they also don't know what I believe about a God. So there are categories of kind of marginalization about who it's easier to marginalize. And when we're talking about marginalizing somebody based on an idea, that's the hardest one. So it's good that some people can still stay in. And it's up to the rest of us to help make it so that they can come out. If you're thinking about coming out, if you're not already out, if you want to know, what should I do? I don't know your family, I don't know your friends. Greta Christina has a good book on coming out where she talks about various stories, but in her talk about it, she talks about how it's a process. You're constantly coming out to new people all the time. I came out to the guy at the magic shop today. He had no idea who I was. I was talking to the magic shop. Oh, what are you in town for? Oh, I'm here to speak, a secular atheist convention. Atheists and other freethinkers. I don't want to exclude the other freethinkers. And he said, oh, I'm an atheist too. Oh, probably don't want that on the tape because we don't want to out him.
It was a magic shop down in Stockton, or maybe it was Long Island, San Francisco.
Yeah,
Can't remember where it was.
Yeah, it was somewhere. But it's not always easy. You're going to know your family better, but here's the thing. One of the things Greta found out, among all the people that she asked, only one person actually regretted coming out, even though some of them have horrible experiences, and it's a lengthy process. It took my parents a while to come around. It took some family members. I lost some friends over it. You have to be comfortable with all the possible consequences, no matter what you think they're going to be. You have to be okay with, you know what, I want people to like me for me. I'm going to throw caution to the winds and do it. And if you think that your job, your life, your health and happiness are going to be damaged by coming out in such a way that you will be worse off, then don't come out. The rest of us will work on making it so that that's not the case, hopefully. And hopefully fast, which is why all the people who can come out should, like today. But I'm not forcing you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm out, been out all my life.
Yay!
But I don't want to tell everybody, just because a lot of people, you're just in passing. For instance, today I played golf with a gentleman, very nice. At the end, he said, I enjoyed the round, shook my hand, and said, God bless you. Nice.
You should play golf with me.
I wouldn't have played that bad if there was a God there. But,
You should play golf with me. I'm terrible, and I'll never say that.
what do you do? I mean, what do you do?
Just eat it.
Yeah.
That's
So,
what I do, but Jesus, just like.
so the question is kind of, how do I deal with this? You know, people making religious claims and statements, and you know, what do? Do you say this? Do you say this? So people think that because I'm so out and do a TV show and everything else, and I live this stuff all the time, I think about it all the time, that it comes up all the time in real life. It doesn't. Now part of it's because I live in Austin, which isn't actually Texas. It's this liberal, hippie, let's smoke weed and swim naked in a lake town. I'm not that I've ever done that. Except in Denver. But by and large, it doesn't come up. And if somebody says, bless you, or God bless you, or whatever, I don't usually say anything. If I'm at dinner and there's somebody praying over their meal, I'm not going to interrupt them. If they're having a lengthy conversation about their church and how atheists are terrible people, I'm probably still not going to go over and say anything. I tend to try to get involved in the conversations where somebody's demonstrated that they have some willingness to have a conversation. But also, if I'm asked a question, I answer. What do you believe? Oh, there's a thing about taking away hope from people. You know, I mentioned a grandmother on a deathbed. They're like, well, if somebody was on their deathbed and they asked you if you were going to heaven, what would you say? Some people think that the only correct answer is to say, yeah, you're going to heaven. I don't think that's the only correct answer. My answer would be, I don't think so. Well, why does what I think matter? You know, I could be wrong. I'm not saying that this is a certainty, but if you ask me what I believe, I'm going to tell you. But if you don't ask, I might keep my mouth shut. The only times that I engage in this in public, when I just happen to overhear something, is if there is some clear risk of harm. And I'll tell you, this has nothing to do with religion, so I won't actually tell that story. It's on my Facebook page. There was a real asshole at the airport the other day, and I called him out. And there was something else I was going to say, but I forgot, so we'll go to another question. Yes? Yes, you!
So I have this thing that I think a lot of young atheists run into, especially the ones that came up in secular households, where, you know, it's really easy to get to this point where you're really angry about all the things that are happening that are bad with religion, and it turns that my theory is that's why a lot of the young atheists tend to be the firebrand type, and I definitely fit that shoe. But because of that, I found that I was falling into this trap of having trouble having compassion with people who came from religious backgrounds, and understanding, you know, all these experiences that they say they have, and I can't relate to that at all. So one thing that I've been thinking about doing is actually going into churches and sitting through services and seeing what is actually going on there, because I haven't done any of that. And I have no idea how to approach that. I know that it's going to be a little bit different for somebody who actually came up with some sort of church involvement, but do you have any particular ideas of, like, just advice in general in terms of approaching this?
Nope. Next question. So yes. First of all, just do it. So when we were in Houston, Aaron Ra and Thunderfoot and I were down there, and they wanted to go visit this megachurch, Joel Osteen's megachurch. And they had a camera, and they're like, okay, we need to figure out how we actually need to sneak in here and do this other stuff to find out. And I was like, what the hell are you guys talking about? It's a church. You walk right in. They want you to come in. You're their target audience. Well, you're not, because Osteen's church is looking for money, and they get that from the followers. But you know, you're going to be walking there. But I go to churches quite frequently. Well, all right, let me. That's a lie. Early on, when I was doing the show, I would go to churches from time to time to make sure that I wasn't misrepresenting what was being presented. It's a good exercise. And sometimes kids will write me and say, my parents, I told them I'm an atheist, and now they're going to force me to go to church. What should I do? You should go. And you should take lots and lots of notes. And you should ask lots of questions. Because if you ask enough questions, they might stop making you go. You shouldn't be asking questions like that. This deal of struggling with compassion because you can't connect, I think you're taking the right actions. The other thing is to talk with other people in the community who have come out of religion and listen to their stories. Margaret Downey is one who said many times that we need more stories. We're out of time, aren't we? No. That we need more stories. We need this stuff to connect people with each other, and this is how you build the communities. And I think you're taking the right steps, and I don't know that I have any great advice. Since you're already recognizing that this is something that you want to work on, I think you're fine. Really. It's kind of the way to go. Yes. Oh, and the thing that I was wanting to say that I forgot about dealing with, like, God bless you and stuff like that. So when it comes to music, I get really irritated when I hear music that I used to love and I find out there's like some religious reference in it. So like U2's Sunday Bloody Sunday, Bono's a little bit of a Jesus nut, and so he includes this line of, you know, the battle's just begun to win, or to claim the victory, Jesus won. And I hear that and I was like, ugh. You read one of my good songs, and it's a good driving song too. Sunday Bloody Sunday, you driving. And then I realized I've never objected to Highway to Hell. I love that song. And it's still promoting a religious concept. I can't stand the country music where it's like, Jesus take the wheel, because you'll never get me to like that. But I love Johnny Cash, and if he's talking about Ain't No Grave, and I'm going up to meet Jesus, I never blink, and yet I got mad about the U2 song. I realized that's a little hypocritical. So I now have to draw lines about what's a little too religious, and then I change the channel. But the end result is it a good damn song? And so when the person comes up and they want to finish off a good day with something you find objectionable, if everything else about it was good, shrug it off. Exercise a little charitable listening. For all you know, that person's an atheist who's just saying what they think you want to hear. This is the traditional end of the day kind of salute. Like when Neil deGrasse Tyson told the astronauts, you know, Godspeed. And some atheists objected, which pissed Neil off, by the way. Because it's just a traditional greeting. He clearly didn't mean that. I doubt many of the astronauts thought it was that way. Good.
Yeah, I'm going to change gears here just a little bit. We're going to go from a regular question and answer to just a one-on-one. He'll hang around for a little while, and then we may be changing venue entirely if we decide to take this party somewhere else. Let's have another round of applause for Matt Dillahunty. More than you know.
That's a song too. Leo Sayer.
Oh. And did you enjoy Keith Lowell Jensen? Isn't he a gem? If you would like some more of Keith Lowell Jensen, well, that could go anywhere, couldn't it? He has CDs and DVDs right out in the front there, and I'm sure he'll sign them for you. So you can get some of Keith Lowell Jensen to take home. You know where to find Matt Dillahunty. And then just a little wrap up about helping us out to bring more speakers like Matt here. If you could follow Matt's example and fill out the little yellow slip, become a member, or maybe donate. I'm going to hand this. This is an actual money bag. You've seen those in movies. This is a real one. I've had it for like 30 years. It's awesome. Anyway, I'm going to hand this to Kathy. If you have a donation or something, I have a little iPad. I can take credit cards, PayPal. We are set up. So it'd be wonderful if there was maybe an angel in the room could pay for the whole night, because sometimes that happens. And the benefit of that is, my last name is Saint, so you could go home and say a real saint called you an angel. It works. It's worth a few points. And then if you have anything, see me or see Kathy. Thank you very much. Matt will stick around. Keith will be out there with his CDs and DVDs. Thank you all so much for coming. See you next time.